Okay, so this video is called Spin Principles. Basically, these are the principles of spin. And spin is the fundamental principle underlying everything. All forces, all substances, all vortices, everything is governed by spin. Whether that fundamental spin that governs everything is magnetic, or it's based on ether, or whatever else, it doesn't really matter. Everything operates according to spin, into spin principles, and thus understanding how spin works, the basic general principles of it and all the different aspects of it, or how spin forces work rather, is absolutely essential to not only to designing every form of technology, spin technology, but also because all technology is spin technology, but also for mapping and modeling reality accurately. All the, as I showed in another video, the spin force fractal of nature, or the spin force fractals of nature. So what we have here in the spin principles, we have the first principle is spin direction. So in reality, in life, you have two spin directions, clockwise and counterclockwise, or clockwise and anti-clockwise. And that's it. You have those two directions. And this, harkens back to the Tao Te Ching and the yin and the yang. You see something, in intimation of this in the kind of symbol of Taoism, but I don't think that the way that it is drawn is correct. I think it's what you see here is more correct, and there you go. So the next principle is, so that's spin direction, clockwise, counterclockwise. The next principle, the second principle, is spin magnitude, or rather, essentially spin force. And I didn't use the term spin force because I'm calling all of these things, spin forces. So I'm trying to use a different term. So spin magnitude is this basic concept that you have these larger kinds of spins and these smaller kinds of spins. And that's basically the principle, that you have all kinds of spins. You have spins essentially the size of galaxies, and you have spins the size of, electrons or whatever, photons. So, but everything is based on spin of all kinds of varying degrees of these two directions, and of varying kinds of spin magnitudes or spin forces. Now, the larger spins obviously spin slower, and the smaller spins spin faster. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but this is just kind of the general idea. Now, these principles of spin direction, spin magnitude, they kind of bring you to the third principle, which is spin speed or frequency. So what you have is, as I said, you have these larger spin magnitudes that are kind of slower spinning, and then the smaller ones that are faster. And again, I don't know how it all works, but what you have is a whole array of spin frequencies, all these different varying spin speeds. And it's possible that what is going on in nature is that you have a fundamental ether substance, and that all the different variations that we see are just spun ether, or ether that is spun at varying kind of frequencies, at varying rates of spin, direction, magnitude, etc. And then you have everything. And that includes everything: magnetism, electricity, light, plasma, gas, liquid, solid, so on. So, just throwing that in there. The next principle, the fourth principle, after spin direction, spin magnitude, spin speed, is spin and counterspin. Now, it may seem like when I'm saying spin and counterspin, I'm essentially saying the same thing as spin direction, but in fact I'm not. Spin direction is clockwise, counterclockwise, whereas Spin and counterspin is this other principle which I illustrated in other videos, which is this essentially this figure right here, or this geometric pattern, which is like the Nautilus shell essentially, which is you have you have three spins here. You have the primary spin, a secondary spin ring that's going in the opposite direction, and then tertiary spin rings, which are again going in opposite directions again. So you have this. This is much more accurate depiction of how the forces of nature actually work. Spin and counterspin, primary spin, secondary spin ring, tertiary spin rings. And again, so you have the primary spin going this way, then you have these spin rings, this spin ring rather, going the other way. Then you have these tertiary spin rings going like this all the way back. So you see, here's a drawing just to show what's happening. You have the first spin going this way, which is primary, the second spin going opposite, which is a smaller spin, and then the third spin, which is kind of going towards the primary spin, but it's smaller again. And so this, I believe, is the pattern that if you take it and you turn it 3 dimensions, and if you take it and add spirals into it and vortices and what have you, this pattern right here can map all the forces in nature. It can, this little template, spin and counterspin, primary spin, secondary spin ring, tertiary spin rings. This pattern can map, and I've elaborated on it in a number of videos, but you can basically map, I believe, if ether is the fundamental force, and it has to be the beginnings of spin, then you could map out ether spins with this pattern. Likewise, magnetic spins, the spins of electricity and electrons, the spins of light and photons, the spins within plasma and gases and liquids and solids. And in fact, if there's anything else out there, quarks, gluons, leptons, whatever the hell, it's all can be mapped by this principle of spin and counterspin. And they all kind of, as I was saying about spin speed and spin frequencies, essentially the higher kind of frequencies kind of are spinning force into the lower frequencies. And there's kind of like, I'm not sure how it all works exactly, but I know that you do have these different spin magnitudes and these different spin frequencies. So I'm not sure how it all fits together, but I do believe that it follows this basic template, and there's kind of like a seamless kind of flowing of spin and counterspin like so, or force and counterforce like so, that's happening throughout all the different substances and forces of nature. So I can't emphasize that more strongly. So then the fifth principle is that you have spin patterns. Now what's interesting about spin patterns, they're an elaboration on the basic spin directions, but they're basically a little bit different. How I've diagrammed it is as a 4-spin kind of structure, which is 2 clockwise and 2 anti-clockwise. And what's interesting about spin patterns is you can have relatively stable as well as unstable spin patterns. So just something to think about. Then the next thing is patterns are more kind of, like I said, just kind of like a unit of, if the basic unit is these 2 spin directions, these are the 2 units that underline everything. But when you go the next step, spin patterns, you put it into these 4 spins, that's kind of like the unit, the kind of like the unit for everything else, if you will. And then what comes next is you have spin structures. And spin structures can be stable and unstable as well. And I have this drawing, which is just a bunch of alternating, just a bunch of spins bundled together. I didn't map it out precisely. Like, it should look like this at all scales, following this whole pattern of spin and counterspin. But I just kind of wanted to make it simple and lay it out. But you have, so you have patterns which are kind of like the building block built upon the two primary, fundamental spins of clockwise and anti-clockwise, which are two clockwise, two anti-clockwise. Then they build spin structures which can be stable or unstable, relatively speaking. Now, to give you an example, okay, let's say clouds. Clouds are kind of like an unstable spin structure that they break up relatively easily. A human being is a more stable spin structure that is more, sticks together a little bit better, generally speaking, So now the final kind of principle is spin waves and spin currents. These are basically contractive and expansive forces where what is happening is an absorption or release of energies or substance. And the diagram that I have may not be clear in this particular iteration, but what you have there, you can't probably see it at all, but what you have there is you have alternating arrows. You have this ring of arrows that's going out and a ring of arrows going in. In the center you have a contractive force, and to the periphery you have an expansive force. Basically the basic principle is that, and I have a better drawing of this in another video, probably titled Spin Force Geometry. And what it shows is that if you have alternating spin patterns all throughout nature, regardless of how symmetric or asymmetric they are, what you're going to have is this kind of situation where you will have expansive and contractive forces. And I think even if you go to the sink and you run water and you let the water, you put the stopper in the drain and you let the water fill up and you run the water, you can actually get a sense of what I'm getting at, that there will be a sense of how these expansive contractive forces work, and as well as spin waves and spin currents. But essentially, so I mean this last principle is important because it's a sense of how everything in nature not only spins but how it breathes through the absorption and release of energy. So that's about it. Those are the spin principles: spin direction, spin magnitude or force, larger and smaller, spin speed or frequency, which is just kind of parallels that, spin and counterspin, for which I have this kind of diagram, spin patterns, which are these little 4 spin things, and then spin structures, which are right there, gives you a sense of it, and then spin waves or spin currents, which are ultimately due to these kind of alternating spins producing expansive and contractive forces. So that's it. That's the spin principles. Think about it. Everything's based on spin. All technology should be designed according to the principles of spin and vortices. So, that's about it. Thanks.